They took my grandmother's ring right off the display table. Not borrowed. Not asked. Just picked it up, slipped it onto her finger, and smiled like it already belonged to her. My future sister-in-law's mother, a woman named Deborah Whitfield, held her hand up to the chandelier light in the grand foyer of Hargrove Estate and said, loud enough for the entire room to hear, "Now this is a ring worthy of a Whitfield bride." I was standing 5 feet away. Nobody looked at me. That ring had been sitting in a small velvet box on the welcome table, the one I had set up myself that morning, next to the guest book and the floral arrangement of white peonies. It belonged to my grandmother, Eleanor. She had worn it every day for 53 years until arthritis made that impossible. When she passed, she left it to my brother, Daniel, and me jointly, with a note that said, "For the one who marries for love, not for show." Daniel had placed it on that table, as a tribute to her memory. A centerpiece of sentiment, not an accessory for Deborah Whitfield to try on between glasses of champagne. I walked over quietly. "That was my grandmother's," I said. Deborah looked at me the way people look at a smudge on a window briefly, without interest. "Oh, it's lovely, isn't it? A bit small for a proper engagement stone, but the vintage sentiment is charming." She handed it back to the velvet box herself, as if returning something she had already decided wasn't worth keeping. Then she looked at me fully for the first time. "And you are?" "I'm Daniel's sister, Claire." Something shifted in her expression, not warmth, not recognition. More like recalibration. Like she was filing me into a category. I watched her eyes move from my face to my dress, to my shoes, and back again. I was wearing a simple navy wrap dress. Nothing flashy. I had learned a long time ago that the people who need to announce their success rarely have anything left to prove. "Ah," she said. "The sister." She said it like that was a complete sentence. Then she turned back to her daughter, Madison, who was glowing in a blush Monique Louier gown, laughing at something my brother had whispered in her ear. Daniel was happy. That was what mattered. I kept telling myself that. I had been telling myself that for the past 4 months, ever since he called me from Boston to say he had met someone. That it was serious, that her family was, and I remember his exact words very well connected. I had heard the slight apology in his voice, the way he had paused before describing them, like he was bracing me for something. I had flown in from Portland 2 days ago. In those 2 days, I had organized the welcome setup for tonight's rehearsal dinner, confirmed the catering order, handled a last-minute floral emergency when the original vendor canceled, and quietly paid the balance on the venue deposit when Daniel mentioned, almost offhandedly, that there had been a billing hiccup. The venue was Hargrove Estate, a restored 19th century property on the outskirts of Ashford, Connecticut. 12 acres, a converted carriage house, a rose garden that photographed like a dream, and a main hall that seated 200 with room to breathe. I knew it well because I owned it. Not in the way people say they own something as a figure of speech. The deed was in my name. Hargrove Estate LLC, registered in the state of Connecticut, operating since I purchased the property 6 years ago, at 28. Restored it over 3 years, and built it into one of the most sought-after private event venues in the Northeast. We were booked 18 months out. We had hosted a senator's daughter's wedding, 2 Fortune 500 corporate retreats, and a Netflix documentary filming. Our Architectural Digest feature had run last spring. I had not told Daniel I owned the venue when he booked it. He had gone through my general manager, Marcus, who had honored the family rate without mentioning ownership. I wanted Daniel to have what he wanted without feeling like he owed me something. That was just how we worked, the two of us, ever since our parents divorced, and it had been mostly just us. I had not anticipated the Whitfields. The rehearsal dinner was scheduled for 7. It was now 5:45. And the main hall was filling up with people I had never met. Deborah's college friends, Madison's sorority sisters, a set of Whitfield cousins who moved through the space like they owned it in the way people do, when they are accustomed to owning things without having purchased them. I slipped into the kitchen corridor to check on the catering setup. My event coordinator, a woman named Priya, who had worked with me for 4 years, met me near the service entrance with her tablet and an expression that told me something had already gone sideways. "The Whitfield party requested to move dinner from the East Garden to the main hall," she said. Without going through us, they told the catering team directly. I kept my voice level. What did the catering team say? They started moving tables. I closed my eyes for exactly 2 seconds. "Move them back. Gently. Tell them there are structural lighting rigs in the main hall for tomorrow's ceremony that cannot be disturbed." "Which is true." Priya nodded and disappeared. I straightened my dress, put the velvet ring box which I had quietly retrieved from the welcome table, and tucked into my clutch, and walked back into the foyer. Deborah was holding court near the fireplace. She had gathered around her a small audience of Whitfield women, and was speaking in the particular tone of someone who expects to be recorded for posterity. I told Madison when she first brought Daniel home, I said, "Sweetheart, he's lovely, but you need to understand what you're marrying into, not just who you're marrying. The family circumstances, the resources, the network. All of it matters." She swirled her wine. "Of course, we adore Daniel. He's made something of himself. Self-made men have a certain charm." She said self-made the way some people say homemade when they mean it politely but would still prefer something from a proper bakery. I picked up a glass of sparkling water from a passing tray, and stood at a comfortable distance, close enough to hear, far enough to be overlooked. His sister, though. Deborah's voice dropped just enough to signal that what followed was a confidence, while still being audible to everyone within 10 feet. I looked her up. She runs some kind of small business. Events, or something. Very sweet. Very local. I'm sure she does lovely little things for modest budgets. She smiled with her whole face. It must be hard, watching your brother marry into this kind of life, when you've stayed so contained. One of the Whitfield cousins, a young woman in a yellow dress, glanced over and caught my eye. Her expression flickered. I gave her a small, neutral smile, and took a sip of my water. My phone buzzed. It was Marcus, texting from the estate office. Whitfield guest just told our groundskeeper the rose garden needs to be cleared for a photo setup tomorrow morning. Before the ceremony. Said they already cleared it with management. Wanted to confirm. I typed back. They did not clear it with management. Hold the garden as scheduled. I'll handle it. I found Deborah 20 minutes later near the escort card table, redirecting place settings with the focused energy of a woman who had never once been told no in a context she considered relevant. Excuse me. I said. I noticed a few of our arrangements being adjusted. I just wanted to make sure everything is working for you. She looked up. Oh, the venue staff is very sweet, but some of the table configurations aren't quite right for our family's needs. I've just been making a few small corrections. I understand, I said. We do have a specific setup that we've coordinated with the couple. Any changes would need to come through the event coordinator. She's happy to help. Deborah tilted her head. And you are a coordinator here? I'm Claire. Daniel's sister. She blinked. Then she laughed, a small bright sound. Oh. Of course. I'm sorry, I didn't recognize you out of context. I thought you were staff. She said it warmly, as if this were a compliment, or at worst, a neutral observation. I'm often in the background at these things, I said. Which was true. Dinner went smoothly in the way that things go smoothly when professionals are quietly working to make it so. The food was exactly right. The lighting in the East Garden was soft and flattering. The speeches were warm. Daniel looked at Madison like she was the answer to a question he hadn't known he was asking. I sat at the family table and said little, and ate everything on my plate, and watched. It was during dessert that it happened. Deborah stood, unexpectedly, and tapped her champagne flute. The table quieted. She smiled around the room with the satisfaction of someone about to give a gift that is really about the giver. I just want to say a few words about tomorrow, she began, because I think it's important that everyone understands what this wedding represents. The Whitfield family has built something over 4 generations. A name. A standard. And when Madison chose Daniel, we chose to extend that name, that standard, to include his family. She paused for warmth, or the simulation of it. We are so glad to welcome Daniel's family into ours. All of them. Her eyes swept the table and landed, briefly, on me. Even those of us still finding our footing. The table laughed softly. Someone shifted in their chair. Daniel looked at me across the table. Just for a second. His face did something complicated. I picked up my champagne and took a measured sip and set it down. Then Deborah said, I do want to address one small logistical matter, since we're all together. The rose garden, we'd like to use it for family portraits tomorrow morning. Before the ceremony. I've already spoken with the groundskeeper, and he indicated there might be some scheduling conflict, but I'm sure that can be resolved. These things always work out when the right people are in the room. She smiled at me again, specifically. For reasons I suspected were about territory, rather than affection. The right people. I set down my napkin. It's interesting you mention that, I said. My voice was quiet. I wasn't performing calm. I was calm. There is a difference, and people who have spent years building something real can usually tell. The rose garden does have a commitment tomorrow morning. A photography permit for the ceremony couple, which was confirmed in writing 6 weeks ago, as part of the event contract. Deborah's smile tightened at the edges. Well, I'm sure whoever manages these things can make an exception. They can, I said. I make those decisions, actually. A small pause. You work here? Madison asked. Not unkindly. Just confused. I own here, I said. Simply. Without drama. The same way I would say it in any other context, because it was just a fact. Hargrove Estate. I've owned it for 6 years. I restored the property myself. The rose garden, the carriage house, the main hall. All of it. I looked at Deborah. Which is why I know the morning schedule can't be changed. But I'd be glad to have Priya set up a portrait window in the carriage courtyard before the portraits I've already arranged for Daniel and Madison at 10. The silence at the table was not dramatic. It was more like the moment after a door closes in a quiet house, a settling. Deborah's face did 3 things in very quick succession. I watched all 3 of them. Daniel was looking at me with an expression I recognized from childhood, the one where he was working out how much he had missed and for how long. One of the Whitfield cousins, the one in yellow from earlier, pressed her lips together in a way that might have been suppressed amusement. You own this property, Deborah said, finally. A statement, not a question. She was recalibrating again. I could see the filing system reorganizing behind her eyes. Yes, I said. I do. And you didn't. She stopped. Started again. Daniel didn't mention. He knew, I said, which was a gentle adjustment of the truth. He would know, by morning. We don't really lead with credentials in our family. We just show up and do the work. I reached into my clutch and set the small velvet ring box on the table in front of me. Not as a statement. Just as a reminder to myself of why I was here and what actually mattered tonight. Deborah's eyes went to it. I left before the dessert plates were cleared, because I had an early morning and a property to run, and because I had said exactly what needed to be said, and nothing more. Marcus was waiting for me in the estate office, a restored room off the carriage house that I used when I was on site. He handed me a coffee and didn't ask how it went, because he had been doing this long enough to read an outcome before it was explained. How's the setup for tomorrow? I asked. Perfect, he said. Flowers arrived an hour ago, lighting crew is done. The east lawn is ready. I sat down and opened my grandmother's ring box on the desk in front of me. The ring caught the lamplight, a simple oval sapphire, in a gold setting. Nothing ostentatious. Everything true. My phone rang. It was Daniel. Hey, he said. His voice was careful. Hey, I said. A pause. You own the venue. I do. Claire. Another pause. Why didn't you tell me? Because I wanted you to pick it because you loved it, I said. Not because it was mine. Did you love it? A long quiet. Yeah. He said. Softly. We really did. Then it worked. I heard him exhale something between a laugh and something more complicated. Deborah is, he stopped himself. It's okay, I said. She doesn't have to think well of me. You do. Madison does. That's enough. Madison thinks you're her words formidable. I smiled at the ring. I can work with formidable. I'm sorry, Daniel said. For not noticing. For not I should have been paying more attention to how they were treating you. You were paying attention to your future wife, I said. Which is exactly right. That's what tomorrow is for. After we hung up, I sat for a while in the quiet of the estate office, listening to the old building settle around me. 6 years of work were in these walls. The restored plaster ceilings, the reclaimed wood floors, the drainage system I had argued about with 3 different contractors, before finding someone who understood what I was trying to build. Every inch of it had cost something: money, time, certainty, sleep. But here was the thing about building something real. It doesn't need to announce itself. It just stands. It holds up the weight of the occasion. It makes the moment possible. The next morning, I was up at 5:30. I walked the property before anyone else arrived, the rose garden in the early gray light, the carriage courtyard, the east lawn where the ceremony chairs were arranged in clean white rows. The peonies in the garden were open. The air smelled like damp grass, and something floral, I couldn't name precisely, but had always loved. Priya found me near the garden gate. Whitfield party has requested the carriage courtyard for portraits at 9, she said. They said yes to the alternative slot. Good. I said. Also, Deborah Whitfield left a note. Priya held out a small cream envelope. I opened it. Inside, on Whitfield monogram stationery, in neat handwriting. Miss Claire, I understand I may have made some assumptions. The estate is extraordinary. You've built something that will last. D. Whitfield. It was not an apology. But it was close enough to one that I folded it, and kept it. At 10 o'clock, Daniel and Madison stood in the rose garden while my photographer moved around them in the morning light. Madison's dress caught the breeze. My brother's face was open in a way I hadn't seen since we were kids. I stood at the edge of the frame, holding the velvet ring box, because Madison had asked if she could wear our grandmother's ring for the portrait just for the portrait, and I had said yes. When the photographer finished, Madison came over and took the ring off carefully, and pressed it back into my hands. She would have loved this, she said. She meant my grandmother. She would have loved you, I said. And I meant it. That afternoon, 200 guests filled the east lawn. The ceremony was exactly what Daniel had wanted, simple, warm, unhurried. Deborah Whitfield sat in the front row, and cried in the unguarded way that people cry when something beautiful happens and they momentarily forget to manage how they appear. I sat in the second row, and held my grandmother's ring in my closed hand and watched my brother get married in a place I had built from nothing, in a garden I had planted, under an arch that my team had constructed the night before from white roses and old cedar wood. It was enough. It was more than enough. Afterwards, during the reception, the Whitfield cousin, in the yellow dress, found me near the bar. Up close, she was younger than I'd thought, mid-20s, with an easy smile. I'm Jess, she said. I just wanted to say what you said at dinner last night. The way you said it. She shook her head slightly. That was something. It was just the truth, I said. That's what made it something. She said. We clinked glasses, mine sparkling water. Hers something rosé and cheerful, and I looked out across the lawn at the 200 people talking and laughing in the space I had made. In the light I had planned for, and I thought about my grandmother, who had worn a small oval sapphire every day for 53 years, and never once needed anyone in the room to notice it in order to know its worth. The debts, such as they were, had been settled without anyone having to go bankrupt. The assumptions had been gently corrected. My brother was dancing with his wife on a floor I owned, under lights my team had hung, and he was laughing so loudly, I could hear him from 20 feet away. I put the velvet ring box in my jacket pocket, close to my chest, and went to join them.